what I'm drawn to is originality with people. I think Muslims are often, are we talking now? Muslims are often attracted to the idea of being right, being correct. And so that is why there is this instinct among the Muslims to constantly correct people who they think they are incorrect or wrong. What that does, if you start doing it from an early age, it basically kills in people any initiative to think and to say something new, because you know you're going to be corrected. You know people are going to tell you, oh, that's not the way it is. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not how it was done in the past. So people start, in order to inoculate themselves from criticism and from being constantly corrected, they start playing it safe. And how do you play it safe? Let's just repeat what people have said in the past, what Abu Hanifa said and what Ash-Shafi'i said and what this and that. And people are going to say, oh yeah, that's good, yeah. But you're not doing anything. You're just basically recalling what somebody else had said. There is no originality there. There is no thinking. It's repetitive and it's imitative. And to be honest, it's boring. It's very boring. So I don't think Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu and Imam Shafi'i rahmatullah alayhi and Imam Malik radiallahu anhu and all of them became who they became by being imitative. They were original. And that's why until today we consider them to be the Imams, right? The leaders of Islamic thought. The moment that we lost originality is the moment that people fell into oblivion. So there are many, many people who we don't even know, we don't remember, we don't talk about them for the simple reason because they were not original. And originality cannot come in a society in which you constantly are telling people you are wrong, you cannot say that, this is not how it's done. So I think one thing that we need to introduce is this courage to be wrong. Because if I have a wrong opinion, what's the worst thing that can happen? Over time, people are going to realize it's wrong, and they may correct it, but not in a way like, you're wrong, but through a social kind of mechanism. Over time, certain ideas just show themselves to be wrong. Others become, over time, kind of evergreen ideas, you know. And for that, you need time. You don't need somebody to immediately step in and say, this is right and this is wrong, and how could you say that, and nobody ever said that, and this is outside the limits of what is allowed to talk about and think about. I think this courage to be wrong and permission to be wrong is really one of the ways to expand knowledge. Think of it. Even today, people would look back at some of the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa and they would say, oh, he was wrong on this opinion, he was wrong on that opinion, or maybe this is not the majority opinion, maybe the Jumhur, the majority, didn't agree with him. And yet he still remains to be one of the leading Imams because his overall thought was original. Particular opinions, anybody can get wrong those. Nobody is safe from that. But today we've come to a point that if somebody even says something that is deemed to be wrong, they are immediately not only corrected, but they are basically cast aside. And that prevents any originality, that prevents expanding Islamic thought, that prevents expanding our thinking, because everybody will tell you that you have to be 1,000 times wrong to eventually get it one time right. You know, like even if you do a scientific experiment, for instance, people do it sometimes for hundreds of times and repetitively. And you know, there is that saying, you know, it's not about, I think it was ascribed to Thomas Edison, you know, it's not about being right, you know, something like one time, but, you know, I was also wrong 1,000 times in order to be right one time. When you cut off from people the permission and the ability to be wrong. You have cut off even their ability to be right. Because how do you learn? You learn through mistakes. You learn through errors, trial and error. You learn through, you may be writing a paper or thinking about something and you come to an opinion. And then after further thinking, you realize, well, maybe that wasn't that great, And people do it. People do it, even in fiqh. The great example is Imam Shafi'i, rahmatullahi alayhi. In Shafi'i madhab, there is something that is known as al-qadim wal-jadid, the old and the new. Because he changed certain opinions during his lifetime. So they would say, according to the old Shafi'i opinion, this is what he thought about these things, 1, 2, 3. The new opinion or the new madhab of Shafi'i is this, this, and that. Why did he change his opinions? Number of reasons. One, you could say intellectual maturity. As you go on in life, you study more, you understand better, you realize, maybe what I thought was right 20 years ago isn't right any longer. He also changed his geographical location. He moved from Hijaz, from Arabia to Egypt. And that necessitated a new fiqh. Now imagine, if at that time, in one lifetime, during the time when the social change was slow compared to what it is today, if at that time he changed his opinion within, let's say, 20, 30 years or less, Imam Shafi'i lived 54 years. He was born in 150, he died in 204 after Hijrah. 54. He wasn't an old man when he died. So he changed his opinion at that time. Imagine somebody moving from Egypt to the United States, somebody moving from Saudi Arabia to the United States, somebody moving from Pakistan to the United States, and yet we insist that what we held, the opinions we held back there, should be the same opinions that we hold here. So I think these are the kind of things that can give us some indications how we can think in a more original, I don't want to say freer way, because, when people see the word free, they tend to, but in a freer way. We need to be free to think.
Hey, salam everyone. I'm excited to tell you guys about this amazing new group called Muslim Professionals, founded by a successful Muslim businessman. This is a free community connecting over 4,000 Muslims across the United States, working in places like Google, Microsoft, and Spotify. They're looking to connect people online and offline to work together, whether that's help finding a new gig, exchanging business ideas, forming partnerships, investing, or just making new friends. It's completely free to join. Just apply at muslimprofessionals.us. Let's grow together, win together. Professor Ermin Sinanovic, a political scientist and a scholar of Islam, currently a faculty associate at Cornell University. Still there?
I mean, that's my, let's call it secondary affiliation, but correct.
What's your first? What would you say is your first?
I'm executive director of the Center for Islam in the Contemporary World, which is affiliated with Shenandoah University in Virginia. So it's CICW. That's my primary affiliation. That's where I work. That's what I do. We have a lot of Islamic programs, from teaching to research to all kinds of different things. And yes, I'm also a faculty associate in research in Southeast Asia Studies program at Cornell University. So,
MashaAllah.
So you're right.
Very nice, man.
Yeah.
And Omar Nassimi told me, and shout out to Omar Nassimi and Osama, we're here at Center DC, a lovely place. It's exactly where you think we are, in the center of DC, alhamdulillah. It's wonderful back at home in Maryland, Washington, DC area. It's a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the podcast, brother.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation.
MashaAllah, one of your pieces that you sent me, I didn't get a chance to completely read it because we did this almost last minute. Alhamdulillah, thank you for coming out. But you talked about, I believe, Tajdeed. Is this what we discussed earlier, renewal?
So I think Tajdeed is a very powerful concept. As a word, it basically means renewal, right? And it comes from the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, Allah will send to this ummah on top of every 100 years someone who will renew their religion for them. إن الله يبعث لهذه الأمة على رأس كل 100 سنة من يجدد لها دينها. This hadith in Sunan Abi Dawud, deemed to be Sahih hadith, and from this came the concept of Mujaddid, the renewer. So Muslims throughout history have written about this, who would be a renewer of the century, because the hadith indicates that this happens every 100 years. And this is closely connected to what I would call the Quranic conception of history, especially the history of the prophets. If you look what the Quran says about the prophets, usually Allah sent the prophets when people would go astray, when people would forget the message that previous prophets brought, or when some corruption or moral degradation would spread in society. So then Allah will send the prophets to fix it, to remind them of Tawheed, belief in the oneness of Allah and all of that. And on top of that, sometimes there would also be a social message. But we believe that Muhammad ﷺ was the last and final messenger. So what happens if the society starts deteriorating after that? Tajdeed is usually related to kind of intellectual understanding, correcting the concepts. When people start moving away from certain concepts and so on, bringing them back to the Quranic understandings, or the understandings that the Prophet ﷺ brought. And then another question is it one person per century, or could it be multiple? And a number of people, including, I believe, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the most famous commentator of Sahih al-Bukhari, wrote that actually it could be more than one person per century. Now, if you look back at what people have written about these Mujaddidin, usually they were men. So the question is, can a woman be a Mujaddid? I don't think there is a reason why not. We have not written about that as much because, for a number of reasons, cultural, historical, and so on. But you could look back and you could make a case that some of the women were also Mujaddidun. Why not?
What would you say in our time a Mujaddid would bring to the table?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Could be a number of things, because Muslim community needs so much. It needs so much. It could be
What are the keystone issues?
To me, it's what I've said earlier, is returning to the Quran. But what I mean by that is returning to the Quranic worldview. What are the main concepts in the Quran? And how do they constitute what you could call a framework for thinking, a framework for understanding the world?
Have you looked into this? Because you've mentioned it multiple times.
Yeah.
Have you looked into the framework of Quranic thinking?
I've looked into it. I can't say I've been as systematic, but as maybe I could have been, but I've looked into it. So to me, some of the cornerstones of the Quranic worldview are, in addition to cardinal values, so what I mentioned earlier in connection with, Taha Abdurrahman, taqwa, al-amana, trustworthiness, God consciousness, as-sidq, truthfulness.
Those are the three.
So those would be some of the values. But
Would
in
you
addition
put
to values,
gratitude?
there are concepts.
Okay.
And there are certain. So some of the concepts are the creation of human being in the Quran, how it's described. I think it's one of the most powerful aspects of the Quran, because the Quran doesn't only talk about the creation of human being as a physical creation, even though it talks about that as well, but the creation of a human being as a moral creation, ethical creation. And you'll find the Quran amazing passages, from the famous story in Surah Al-Baqarah, the conversation between Allah and the angels when He created human being, inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I'm going to create this deputy on the earth, this steward. And they were astonished, how could you do this when they're going to kill each other? They're going to spread corruption, But then there is knowledge. Allah says that He gave knowledge to human beings. And gave them ability to think, and then gave them the innate understanding of right and wrong. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. All of these constitutive elements, building blocks of a human being, that are so beautifully explained in the Quran, are part of that Quranic worldview, that when you understand that gives you such a powerful way of looking at life, such a powerful way of looking at existence, at the world around you, at what Allah has created. So it's really transformative. It's transformative. And so I think going back to the Quran means exactly that if you are able to bracket out what you have learned in school and what they told you what human beings are and biology and so on, and go back to the Quranic understanding of a human being as a moral agent, as a creation that was given a special task in this world, and connected it to the next world, you're having a complete paradigm shift there. Understanding what human is, what life is, what this world is about, where this is leading to, about the world to come, and so on. So that's what I mean by return to the Quran.
What's interesting about what you're saying is that knowledge is what makes us human.
It's
right?
one of
Attaining.
it's one of the things, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, that Allah taught Adam names of all things, names of things. And when He asked the angels name these things, they couldn't, because they didn't have knowledge. So it is by knowledge that humans are elevated over angels. Even though our nature can be very sinful, it can be very violent,
bestial.
Yeah.
And that's why Allah says in a part of the Quran that those who do not seek knowledge and do not seek His knowledge are like cattle, are like animals, right? Because they are not touching into that human element of themselves.
Exactly. It's the moment that you see. Sometimes people misinterpret this verse. Hum kal an'am bal hum adall. And so they look at it and they say, oh, these people are worse than animals. That's not what the Quran says.
No.
The Quran says that when you forget all the gifts that Allah has given us, when some people forget those gifts that Allah has given us, knowledge, understanding of right and wrong, understanding of our destiny, understanding of our final destination.
Which is all knowledge.
And that's all knowledge.
Yeah.
When you forget that, when somebody forgets that, then they become lower than animals. Why? Because animals are only given instincts. They have no knowledge. They're given instincts, and they act on instincts, and they do exactly what Allah has created them to do. When humans do not do what Allah has created them to do, in that sense they are worse than the cattle, because they're not fulfilling their purpose. Their purpose in life.
Yeah.
Their task. So that's what this verse talks about. So it is knowledge. It is
It's interesting, if I can comment on it, because I've been looking into this verse quite
please.
a bit. What I love about it also is that a cow is satisfied in its cowness.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're saying, it's performing its duty as a cow by being a cow. That's it. But you as a human being cannot be satisfied in just existing. Yeah. You have to seek knowledge. You have to build. You have to improve yourself. And that's when you become satisfied.
Not satisfied or elevated.
Because even a dog, like, and I don't want to speak on fiqh, you can correct me here, but even a dog, we can't eat what a dog hunts unless that dog is trained to hunt. If a dog has become elevated with knowledge,
exactly,
then we can eat what it
it
has hunted.
We won't call it knowledge. We would call it training.
Right.
In their case. And the Quran talks about this as well. So you're absolutely right.
So you're from Bosnia,
and
right?
Herzegovina.
And Hertz.
Yeah,
I
you
don't
don't
know
have
how
to
to,
say
I
it.
don't know how to say that
No,
next
it's
one.
okay.
I'm not gonna lie.
You're not the only one.
I purposefully avoided it.
I know. That's why I'm saying it.
And Bosnia is a beautiful example of Europe or Western tradition and Eastern tradition coming together. It's a Muslim country in Europe. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from the Europeans. And I think there's a lot we can learn from any civilization that Allah has given power to, because He's given them power for a reason. They're doing something right. For example, the most people I find interested in animals and out in nature and in the woods and the jungles are white people. It's very I don't see many Arabs doing that. I don't see many other people doing that. But so, and that comes from a place of curiosity, a place of seeking knowledge.
Yeah. And being enchanted by the world.
And that's one thing that the Quran teaches is the state of awe.
Yeah. Awe and enchantment with the world. You see, there's another great contemporary Muslim scholar based in Malaysia, Sayyid Muhammad Naqib al-Attas. And in his book on Islam and secularism, he writes that there are three things that have happened in modernity that have really sort of had very negative impact on the Muslims. The first one is disenchantment with nature. When nature becomes something that, as people say, you conquer, you control. Oh, we've built a dam to stop the river, so we have conquered the nature and this and that. So this kind of modern understanding of human being in constant war with nature is not something that I think is part of the Quranic understanding of the relationship between nature and human beings and God. So, and nature was disenchanted. It's not a sign. It's not an ayah. It's something that you conquer and you use it for your own benefits. So you have to find a way how you can control nature so you can manipulate it so that you can derive benefit from it, as opposed to being in awe of it because it is a sign. It's one of the signs of ayat of Allah. So disenchantment of nature, deconsecration of values, and desacralization of politics. I'm not going to explain what number 2 and 3 means for now. People can read the book, and if you Google it, you'll find the PDF readily available, Islam and Secularism. But yeah, so disenchantment of nature. So we need to re-enchant our understanding of nature. We need to be in awe of nature. We need to look at it as a sign of Allah. And you said it right. I think many people in the West are. They love to go into the woods. They love to walk around and just be amazed by nature. And today, because maybe of secularization, many of them do not connect it necessarily to God, but they know that there is something bigger behind it, right? And so I think that's a good thing to have. And it's something that we as Muslims should be doing and can do.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is the New York Times just released an article this week about how being in more state of awe can improve your mental health and relieve you from depression. And constantly the Quran is calling on you to be in a state of awe.
Exactly.
And it leads it to gratitude. And gratitude is one of the main steps to getting over depression.
Yeah.
And I think that what I love about what you're saying is, like, Allah says some things that are so simple. He'll be like, look at the wood in your fire. I once tried to do this with a group of my friends, and they thought I was crazy. Yeah. I was like, guys, look at fire. What is that? Like, what's going on there? Like, if you actually just sit there staring at fire, you can't grab it, but you can feel it. It affects you, but you can't affect it. I don't know many things in existence that I can do absolutely nothing to. I can literally make it exist, but I can't touch it, and it can touch me.
Yeah.
And just like Allah says, look at the fire that you built. Who gave you that wood? And so this framework of thinking as you go through the Quran builds on itself over and over again, and it prepares you to go out into nature and look at the trees and look at the birds and look at the rivers.
Yeah, the Quran says, وكم من آية في السماوات والأرض يمرون بها وهم عنها معرضون. How many signs are there in the heavens and the earth? They pass by them, but they are oblivious. They turn away from it. So I think what the Quran constantly calls us to is not to be oblivious, is to be constantly reminded of the greatness of Allah, the creation that He put in place, the signs that He put in the world, the ayat in heavens and earth, and to constantly, like you said, be in awe of this, to have that enchantment, to have that sense of gratitude. That would solve, I think, half of the problems that humanity have today, and mentally speaking, in terms of mental health that many people are facing. I think a lot of it comes from lack of that, from that obliviousness, and then obliviousness of the one that created this all. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. Do not be like those who have forgotten Allah, who are oblivious. Then Allah made them forget themselves.
One of my favorite products at Cure is the cold-pressed organic black seed oil. It's an 8-ounce bottle packed with incredible health benefits. It boosts your immune function, clears acne, supports health digestion, promotes healthy skin, and so much more. You can check it out at cureyourworld.com or on Instagram at cureyourworld and use the Ansari code Ansari15 for 15% off. So what would you, because I think you have a unique perspective, what do you think we can learn from the West? Because it's not all bad, right?
Yeah.
Like
discipline, punctuality.
Why do you think punctuality is important? Why does that matter?
It's so important, brother. I think Ali Izetbegovic also mentioned it.
You were one of my first guests on time, actually. Yeah, I just realized that.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I wish I wasn't. Punctuality for me is very important, because when you're not punctual, you're wasting people's time. When I was a student at Islamic University in Malaysia, I learned so many things, and it was a good place to study. But one thing I never liked is that a lot of lecturers used to come late to class. So I'm thinking like this. There's 50 of us in class. We are there, let's say, at 9 o'clock in the morning. The class is supposed to start at 9. The lecture comes at 9:15. 15 minutes times 50 people. That's 750 minutes of Ummah's time that has been wasted. That's a lot of time, brother. That's more than 12 hours. 12 and a half hours. In 12 and a half hours, you can do so much. You can read a book. You can build something. And then multiply that every day across multiple classes. And so I made a vow to myself back then that if I ever ran things, I'll try to do them on time and be on time. Because I don't want others to feel the way I felt when I was a student, and sometimes some of my lecturers will come late. It's okay, somebody can have an emergency, can come late once in a while, but if somebody comes late every time, then that's a systematic problem. Ali Izetbegovic, the former Bosnian president, Islamic thinker, Muslim thinker from Bosnia, when he received King Faisal Prize from the Saudi government, they give out these annual prizes for contributions to Islam. And he mentioned this. He said, why is it that the Ummah that has every single ritual tied to time is the one that is always late? What is it with us? إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. Salat has been prescribed to believers at prescribed times. I cannot say, now is what time is now? 9:15 here at night. So we prayed the Isha already. I can't say, I'll pray Dhuhr now. No, it's not time for Dhuhr. There is time for Dhuhr. But this is not it. It's prescribed. You cannot do Hajj in Ramadan. You have to wait for the Hijjah. You cannot do fast You can do voluntary fast in Sha'ban and Rajab and Dhul Qa'dah and all these months. But there's only one month in which it's prescribed as a fard, and that is Ramadan. Every zakat, it has to have hawl. It has to have 1 year. Has to pass for the nisab to be established. So you have to calculate it and be precise on it. Every ibadah in Islam, major ibadah, is related to specific time. So what does that tell you? It's a way of teaching also Muslims, among other things, that keeping these specific times is very important. And yet Muslims are the least punctual people in the world.
What's funny is that the Quran is constantly telling you you don't have time. You're always out of time. We sleep 1/3 of our lives.
Yeah.
I think we use the bathroom for 2 to 5 years of it. We entertain for 10. Subtract all that, what do you have? Not many things.
And so that time has to be used wisely. So I think punctuality, and you find that in the West.
Yeah.
You find punctuality, you find discipline. I think also...
Is punctuality, is that a root source or is that an outcome of something else?
I think it depends from which angle you look at it, and I think it may be different for different people, but if it's a manifestation of something, then it's a manifestation of the lack of, I think, understanding and discipline. Seriousness. We don't take it seriously. Never mind, are we going to be are we meeting at 7 EST or MST? EST is Eastern Standard Time, MST is Muslim Standard Time. If it's EST, then it's 7 o'clock. If it's Muslim Standard Time, could be 7:10, 7:20, 7:25. But that's wasting somebody else's time. And that to me is lack of respect. If I tell you I'm going to come at 7, but I come at 7:30, that means I don't respect the agreement that we made. And I don't respect you as much as I should. So if we teach our children to be punctual, that means we are teaching them respect. We are teaching them dignity. We are teaching them to consider other people, to be considerate. There is so much.
And Ghazali said the number one thing for your hidayah, for your guidance, is to have a schedule, and a timed schedule. And he said, don't leave a moment where where your time isn't filled with something, because then it will be filled with the devil. Like Ghazali was very serious about time. Our scholars were very serious about time.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that you're a political scientist, and we've yet to talk about politics at all.
Yes, I am a political scientist, but I also, you could say, I studied Islamic studies. My undergraduate degree is in Islamic studies. My master's degree is in Islamic studies. So you could say that I'm equally political scientist and, kind of Islamic whatever studies or sciences, person.
Okay, well, let me throw something at you here and see if you're if you're for it. Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting is one of the Sahaba, I forget which one, but when he went to Europe, he said, these people don't bow to their kings. They don't bow to their leaders, yet they respect their leaders. Like there's this middle ground that the Europeans, he felt they had found. I forgot whether it was like Amr ibn al-As or Khalid ibn Walid, something like that, like a general.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because you find in the Muslim world the extremes. Either they really hate their leader or they really bow to their leader. And there isn't this notion of something in the middle where there's a healthy criticism, where it's weird because revolutions happened in the West so often, and they never happen in the Muslim world almost, at least to my knowledge. Have we had a healthy history of revolution?
There have been revolutions, yeah. I mean, you can consider that what Ben Umayyad did was a revolution, maybe not with a good outcome, but it's a revolution. Revolution means radical change, right? A break with the past, end of one type of regime and institution of another. The Abbasids was a revolution. The Fatimids, the Mamluks, in a way you could say, all of these were not revolutions in modern sense. Revolutions in modern sense means usually common people come up and come together and there are demonstrations and they break down the government, But in the past, revolutions usually meant you have an armed group that comes and basically defeats whoever is in power, So you have those kind of things, yeah, but there was also a counter movement in Islamic thought, especially among the Sunnis, which basically said that obedience to rulers is obligatory even if they do the worst abominations.
Even if they're oppressive.
Yeah.
Tell me, is that, what's up with that? How do you feel about that? I think that's crazy.
I know why they did it, but I also know that it cannot be as unequivocal as they say, as some of them say. In other words, there were always other currents in Islamic thought that said that no, you have the right to express displeasure toward the government and not just advise them, but you can take other means and steps and so on. The thing is that usually in the past and even today, the rulers are so brutal that they would put down any rebellion in such a bloody way that the scholars said, you know what, better not to do it if it's going to end up in such bloodshed.
Yeah, but that's why Benjamin Franklin, what I love, one of the founding fathers of America, he said, if you give up your freedom for security, you will have neither freedom nor security.
And I think that's what happened to the Muslims, I think that's what happened to the Muslims. There are, until today, so many scholars and obviously people in power who are still sticking to this view that rulers should be unconditionally obeyed. I do not subscribe to that view. I believe that there is a contract between the governed and the governors, and that if governors break that contract, then the governed has the right to remove them. The problem with Islamic political thought is that the means to do so were never institutionalized. So in theory, Muslim scholars would say that the scholar, the ruler needs to get a bay'ah from the people, because people cannot give the bay'ah. Bay'ah is the oath of allegiance or allegiance. Then there should be some smaller group of people, usually called Ahl al-Halli wal-Aqd, who would give allegiance to the governor or to the ruler. And so these people are representatives of the community. You can think of them as electors in American political process.
Electoral vote.
Yeah. And that is fine. But what happens when the ruler breaks the conditions of appointment? So in theory, there should have been some kind of a shura or a council that could basically remove him from power. But that was never institutionalized.
Like a prenup. Like an understanding, if you do this, you get removed.
Yeah,
prenup is a simple
contract.
way. Yeah.
So if you do this and that, then you cannot be a ruler. There is a body, a committee that's going to basically depose you, and then we're going to select somebody else. In theory, that exists in Sunni political theory, but it was never put into practice. It was never institutionalized. And so it became a norm that rulers can stay for as long as they wished, unless somebody else came and removed them violently. So the only way to remove people from power was through violence. And that became a norm in Muslim history, which is very unfortunate, because there is another way. There is an institutional, procedural way to remove them. But we never developed that. We never institutionalized it. It is there in our sources. We could have. Sunni political theorists theorized about it but that theory was underdeveloped. So the mechanism was there. It was never properly implemented, never institutionalized. And then violence became the norm by which governments are removed. And that remains until today. Unless and until we update our Islamic political thought to include this and we institutionalize it in the way, again, what you said, what can we learn from the West, is exactly that. The institutionalized way in which you can depose the government. You can remove it through elections, you can remove it through impeachments, you can remove it through a constitutional process, so that you don't need to go and resort to violence, because violence is the worst thing that can happen. It upsets societies, it kills people, it creates bad blood, it creates, a lot of things. Chaos.
It's the opposite of a state.
So
is violence.
And so today you have Muslim scholars who are still calling for that kind of classical understanding by some, that you have unconditional obedience. They don't want to say, let's now develop new ways of appointing governments, possibility for deposing and removing and changing the government that is peaceful. They say, no, you just have to obey. So even you have to obey someone like Bashar al-Assad and this and that, even if they kill millions and make millions refugees and put millions in jail, that's a failure. That's a failure on the part of Islamic political thought. And some people still uphold those views, and I cannot justify that. So we need to change that.
Some really smart people, too. Some really smart and great scholars have been saying this.
Let's not name names, because if I start going down that road, it's going to get ugly pretty soon. But, that's where Tajdeed is also needed, is to refine and develop our political concepts to make them more in line with the Quran and the established practice of the Prophet ﷺ, so that the continuity and stability of our societies can be brought, because we cannot just talk about stability, we need also to talk about justice, we need to talk about trustworthiness and so on. And you cannot have justice and amana and so on unless you have proper government in place. If you have bad governments in place, then forget about justice, forget about all those cardinal virtues in Islam, So I think that's where we need. And unfortunately, some Muslim scholars are turning a blind eye to it, and they need to change.
How do you feel about the ending of the Caliphate and the beginning of the nation state? Has this been a positive progression for the Muslim world?
The Caliphate that ended in 1924 in Turkey wasn't a real caliphate for a long time, but it did have some aspects of it, and even the Ottomans did not always call it a caliphate, but toward the end they started calling it for symbolic reasons and so on. So nation state, I think, is a bad thing that has happened to the Muslims. As I was listening, I told you I was listening to this Arabic lecture on the way here, and I'm mentioning Arabic specifically because I was thinking about this while I was listening. I was thinking, what a blessing. A scholar from Morocco can give a talk in Arabic. And I'm not talking about non-native speakers like myself. I can listen to that talk if I learn Arabic and so on. I'm talking about the Arabs from Morocco across North Africa and to what we call today the Middle East, Arabia, and so on. People can listen to that talk and understand each other. That is such a blessing. And now come in and create all these arbitrary borders is insanity in many ways. Is insanity. It prevents people who naturally, I think, are disposed to be together and separating them from one another. Because if you look at Arabs, most of them are Muslims. There are Arabs who are not Muslims, but they culturally belong to the same, to the same kind of similar mentality and feelings and so on. Then you have the Arabic language, and there are people who say, oh, there are so many dialects and nobody speaks Fusha. That's not true. People speak Fusha. I've been to many countries in the Arab world, not many, but some, and I can speak with people in Fusha. Not everybody is as well versed in it. In the same way that you go to the Appalachians here, and they're not going to speak Victorian English. And half of the time, I remember once I went to, was it North Carolina or Virginia? It was like really rural place. And I stopped to ask for directions. And the guy said something, and I went back to the car, and my wife asked him, what did he say? I said, I didn't understand a single word he said. He spoke in such a thick accent, I couldn't understand it. So yeah, you have people in the Arab world like that, people in different areas, they have different dialects. But there is Arabic language that's being taught in schools. And if people don't learn it, then blame it on the educational system. Don't blame it on the Arabic language itself. So you have people that are naturally disposed to be together, culturally, historically, linguistically, and then you start putting borders.
And religiously.
For the most part. And even if you look Christians, the Abrahamic religions, they are closest to the Muslims. So there is no reason for Muslims and Christian Arabs not to be together. They've been together for centuries, and so it's all fine. So you have all of this naturally predisposed to be together, and then people start putting borders and boundaries. So for that reason, I think nation state has been a disaster.
Yeah.
For the Muslim world at large, but especially for the Arabs. And we see that in the Arab world, we have so many political dysfunctions. A part of it goes to nation state. There are many other reasons too. But I think that region, those people are predisposed to be together, not to be apart. And until they figure out a way to be together, they're going to continue having many of the problems that we are seeing today in the Arab countries, from violence, mismanagement of societies, dictatorships, foreign interventions, and all of these things.
I think we could just simply take the Germanic model. The best way to bring people together is build roads. If you built a road from Morocco to Egypt, call it a day.
You could. It would be fantastic to have a highway, to have a railway. I mean, the Ottomans tried to do that toward the end. Remember, they created the Hijaz Railway. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Okay. Well, actually, it's been in the news a few days ago because now with Syria being back to its feet a little bit, right? And Turkey playing a great role. Turkey said it's going to start reviving the Hijaz Railway. So what was the Hijaz Railway? It was a railway that the Ottomans built toward the end of the Ottoman Empire, the last 20, 30 years, that connected Istanbul to Medina. So you could actually travel by train 100 years ago, 110 years ago, let's put it, from Istanbul to Medina. You cannot do that today. That has been separated. Lawrence of Arabia convinced the Arabs that the best way to get rid of the Turks is to destroy Hijaz Railway, among other things. And they did, for which an Islamic government, the Ottomans, spent a lot of money that was contributed by a lot of individuals. Even in Bosnia, people collected money and sent it to Istanbul to help building of the Hijaz Railway. And you could travel from Istanbul to Medina by train, through Syria, through Jordan, through Arabia. And you cannot do that today. So why was it possible 110 years ago, but it's not possible today?
Yeah.
It's not possible here. That's the problem.
In the mind. And that's the thing. People think it sounds too simple, too good to be true, but that's exactly what Germany did. The Germanic tribes were all split, but they had a common language. They had somewhat common religion.
And today, China is probably the biggest builder of highways and railways in the world.
When America wanted to prove that it's an empire to the world,
to build the railway,
it showed its highways.
Build highways,
yeah,
highways and railway.
You can take from New York to Florida, one highway, 95. From Maryland, I believe, to Colorado. From Washington to, like, America has highways connecting its entire country together.
Exactly. And the railway too.
The railway.
And so I think those are things we can learn. Obviously, there will be many that would not be happy with that.
Yeah.
And so you would have to work out practical ways of how do you build it. So you need some sort of at least a commonwealth among these countries, a commonwealth that would come, maybe they'll still retain their national borders and those governments, they like to govern and they like to be rulers and nobody wants to, be removed from power. Okay, that's fine. But at least create some kind of commonwealth and connect these countries, build a highway, build a railway, build high-speed train. And you would see a revolution, really. I'm not talking about political revolution. I'm thinking of a revolution of thinking, in economy and so on.
Connectivity,
all of these things, And it can be done. And again, like I said, you can use one language from Morocco all the way to Iraq and everywhere in between. You can use the same language and people understand one another. I think at the emotional level and at the emotive level and so on, people connect to one another. We see that all the time. We see that when the Moroccan soccer fans are chanting pro-Palestine songs during the games. We're seeing it. You see, people are connected emotionally, but the political powers do not have it in their interest to connect them because that would mean their demise in many ways. Yeah. And so they want to keep them split. And then the external factors also don't want the Arabs and the Muslims to get together. So they also put in a lot of effort of keeping them apart. Yeah. But I think the road map is clear, so.
Whoever the reviver is, hopefully he's listening or she's listening. All right, this is my last question for you here. Okay. When I went to Bosnia, one of the things that I thought was interesting was there's a masjid literally in the center of Sarajevo, but then there's like a bar strip like a couple blocks away. And that basically sums up most of what I've seen in Bosnia, whether Sarajevo or Mostar. Can you tell us about the nature of Islam in Europe and with European culture?
I cannot generalize when it comes to Europe. I can tell you about Bosnia. So Bosnia used to be part of the Ottomans. So you could say culturally, it's the Ottoman kind of style Islam. Even you see it in architecture of the mosques, very similar to what you see in Turkey and so on, and in other Ottoman lands.
Austria as well, though, right?
Well, Austria came later, so I'm going to come to that. So you have the Ottoman legacy. That is the main legacy when it comes to Islam in Bosnia. Then when the Ottomans basically ceded or gave away Bosnia in 1878, and this was because of all the wars with Russia and so on that they lost, and they had to make some deals, and they have to basically give away some of the land. And Bosnia was one of the territories that they gave away. They said, we're going to retreat from there. Very soon after, Bosnia was occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that was the introduction, so to say, of Europe, or reintroduction of European culture to Bosnia, because for about 450 years, Bosnia was under the Ottomans. And so you start having, out of that interaction, you have the Ottoman legacy, you have the Austro-Hungarian Empire coming in, and then later on, all the developments that took place, you have this sort of Muslims in Bosnia trying to preserve their faith and religion under a very kind of secular European framework. And so what you find is that you'll find these two worlds coexisting. Like you said, you have a mosque, and then 10 meters down the street, you have a bar. And, maybe the people in the mosque are not happy with it. And maybe people in the bar are not happy there is a mosque up the street. But, it's...
It does seem like there is a very good coexistence with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think over time they found a way to basically accept that reality. That this is not a state any longer that is governed by Islam. It was under the Ottomans, and so many of the European customs and cultures are going to come in, and they're going to make changes, and so they found a way that, to be Muslims while being surrounded by all that.
Yeah.
And that also means that a lot of young people are also going to be secularized, and a lot of young people are not going to be religious at all. But it also means that there is a space for those that want to be religious to be religious. And so, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. And, we pray, and with the people of Bosnia, they're obviously our Muslim brothers and sisters, a part of the Muslim world. And I loved being there. I'll inshallah be going back. Inshallah.
You're most welcome to come back and visit.
Okay. You got a place there? I'm not inviting myself, by the way. I'm actually just curious.
I don't.
You don't have a house there?
I don't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very nice. Professor and Dr. Ermin Sinanovic, Executive Director at the Center for Islam and Contemporary World at Shenandoah University, resident scholar and political scientist of Islam as well, and scholar of Islam as well. Thank you so much for joining the Unstudy podcast, brother. It was a pleasure to have you.
You're most welcome. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you guys for listening to the Unstudy podcast. Hey, Salam, guys. We're trying to build more studios, hire more people, and create more shows that you guys will love and enjoy. If you guys want to invest in us, then go on patreon.com/Unstudy podcast and support us today.